Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The bell is tolling, so I don't know whether it's for me or for everybody else. But either way, it's 7 o'clock. So welcome to the meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. I will start by reading out the usual announcement, which is important. So welcome to today's Audit and Governance Committee meeting. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking, otherwise we won't hear what they're saying. So that takes us on to item 1, appointment of substitutes. Margaret.
Yes, Chairman, we have Councillor Ditter for Councillor Hassan. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Ditter. Item 2, declaration of interest. None? 3, public participation. Margaret?
No public participation.
Yeah. Item 4, minutes. If we, as usual, take these page by page, please, for accuracy. Item page 1. Page 2. And page 3. Right, so I can sign those as a correct record then, please. Is that agreed? Thank you. And that takes us on to the first substantive item, the Audit and Governance Committee Annual Report 2020 to 2021. And could I just say to the officer who wrote this, well done, because it is beautifully clear. And actually, I think it's an interesting read as well. I do hope other members of the Council and the public do read it. It's very full, it's very clear. So thank you for that. And Ms Stroud, over to you to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. It's a function of this committee to oversee a number of work streams relating to audit and governance and generally receive assurance and scrutinise and challenge. And the work of the committee is guided by SIPFA recommendations and also periodically from advice that comes out from the Nolan Committee on Standards and Public Life. And one of the things that's recommended is that the Audit and Governance Committee reports back annually on its work programme. And this committee will recall that typically we would bring a report like this around, well, about 6 months previous to this, around the sort of late autumn period. And the reason it hasn't been presented to you before, members, is that we are materially delayed on the external auditor's work. And this committee's own meetings have been rescheduled and reviewed in light of the external auditor's work. But time went by and we determined that we should nevertheless produce the annual report. So it's an unusual read in that respect because ordinarily it reports back on the work of the external auditors and their findings, and we're not able to do that. So that's one of the substantive points that I'd like to draw out. I suppose the other points to make are that the rest of the work programme of the Audit and Governance Committee has continued uninterrupted, and that's something that we reflected on when the committee considered the annual governance statement previous meeting, that in fact both the internal audit programme and the routine business of statutory officers and committees was able to continue notwithstanding the pandemic. And so in that respect we've not suffered the same misfortune as the external audit process has done. So when the committee reviewed the annual governance statement, they considered in particular the arrangements that the Council put in place to continue operations during COVID, but also how decisions were taken during governance arrangements. Scrutinised the work that had been done and sought some assurances from officers about the impact on staff, customers and the Council. Good discussion about that. The internal audit shared service were able to deliver on their work programme, and they undertook a range of audits across council service areas, as well as looking after the council's corporate risk register during COVID. And the internal auditors were able to report satisfactory outcomes overall and mitigating actions and measures. The council prepared its annual statement of accounts. The finance team led that work. That all internal deadlines were met so that the work could be handed over to the external auditors as scheduled. I've referred to the position as regards the external auditors. That is an ongoing discussion. The chair and vice chair of this committee have been personally very active in making representations and trying to get this issue escalated. And we know that we're in the company of other councils in having a bit significant, but that's not been much comfort to the members of this committee. There's much more I can say about that, to be perfectly honest. I'm sure you'll want to comment yourself, Chair. Of course, as well, a function of the committee is to consider the external audit fee for the year ahead, and that's something that's discussed before. And the committee will recall that it's obviously always open to members of the committee to suggest other items for scrutiny on the agenda. We've considered this year under an exempt paper a question of a dispute with a supplier. Usually the arrangement was one where the council should be receiving income. Assurances about the process. Make sure that receipt of that income could come back on track. So in conclusion, as I said previously, the work programme of the Audit Committee has continued really largely unaffected by external factors such as COVID, so largely unaffected by the fact that the external audit has not been completed, but it is difficult, we would say, as statutory officers now, to be so far misaligned in terms of the internal work programme and external work programme. But at the moment, there aren't many levers we can pull in that regard. So that's all I wanted to say, really, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Over to members for any questions or comments. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. What are the consequences of not having the external audit letter? Because in the NHS, there would be consequences.
A good question, Councillor Johnson. I think Mr. Flynn, the boss, is going to come in on that.
Thank you, Chair. What are the consequences? There are no direct consequences. To deliver audited accounts. I mean, obviously there is a reputational question, but it's quite clear in this case where the responsibility for that lies. We have published our unaudited accounts in line with the requirements continuously, and we'll do so again this year. I think I mentioned the committee, or perhaps one of the committee in my early days. I worked for a well-known council in London who were 4 years behind in their accounts. There were ultimately no consequences. It came to an end when a new chief executive decided simply to write them off and start again from the beginning. So that's ultimately a choice that can be made. The difficulty that we have, however, is that because we don't have final audited balances for last year, we don't have carried forward balances into this year. So it becomes difficult to complete this year's accounts until we know what our starting position is last year. We've got a meeting planned for Friday, I think, certainly before the end of the month, with the audit partner, and we'll hopefully get some clarification from them as to what the proposed timetable is and how they.
I'll follow up on that, Councillor Johnson.
I assume they haven't been paid then?
Actually been paid for the previous years yet.
Or even better.
So we can explore the possibilities of that one. Any other questions or comments from members? No? Right, in that case, if I could move the recommendation, which is that we approve the annual report and that it be submitted to Council for information. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. That takes us on to item 6, the draft internal audit plan 2022 to 23, and this is where Mr. Bromwich earns his money. Over to you, Mr. Bromwich.
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
So before you this evening, members, is the draft plan for 22-23. It's a risk-based plan and has been discussed with the Section 151 CMT as well as CLT. So there's been a wide consultation in regards to the formulation of the plan. The plan links to the overall priorities of the authority and is based on about 300 days. Now, from my own judgment, those sort of days for this size of authority is probably adequate. It's about right. And certainly from my own internal audit annual opinion requirement, based on the coverage that we have within the plan, I'm more than happy that I will be able to draw an opinion based on the work that we're planning to do. So as part of good governance, the plan remains in draft form for now to allow yourselves to consider and debate the suggested areas and the overall coverage. The plans are actually reviewed on a regular basis as risks change over time. So this one, I would emphasise, should be seen as a plan, and it could change as the year progresses. If there were to be any changes, then those changes would be discussed with the Section 151 officer and would be reported back to committee for your information. So the plan is providing reasonable coverage across all the key areas, as you'll see. That's including finance, corporate, housing, ops, as well as communities. I've included, for monitoring purposes more than anything, indicative quarters against the various reviews, so that I can bring those back and report those before committee as the year progresses. And as you know from previous experience, I report on those reviews within the progress reports that come before committee every time. So we plan to continue with that process to provide the assurances of the committee up to date. So, Chair, you're requested to approve the plan this evening, but I'm more than happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bromwich. Members, Councillor Bayliss.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to. It's a theoretical question at this point, really, which is about mission drift, I suppose. If there was a strategic project the council was engaged with, and there was a concern that it wasn't it ultimately didn't deliver what the council had agreed as the key objectives for it, is that something that internal audit would feel able to review and comment on, and maybe review in the sense of what went wrong and what could be done to avoid it in the future? I mean, there's sort of service issues here in the plan, which is fine. But if there was a big strategic project that has been funded and whatever, so I don't particularly have an example, but is that the sort of thing that internal audit would be able to look at and review?
Good question, Councillor Bayliss. Thank you. Mr. Bromwich, can you confirm that is the case?
Chair, yes, I can indeed. We have done some work in the past in connection with similar things, and we're more than happy to be involved in those types of areas and report back with lessons learned. I think a good example of that was Sansom Walk, which has come before this committee, and that was a special piece of work that was commissioned on the request of this committee.
Thank you, Councillor Bayliss. Any other questions or comments from members? No, Mr. Bromwich, you have a habit of pushing people into silence. I mean, it's wonderful. Right, so the recommendation, put the recommendation to the members then, it's that the committee approve the draft annual internal audit plan. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Item 7, Internal Audit Progress Report 2021-2022. Mr. Bromwich, over to you again, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report will be for
familiar to members of the committee. It brings before members the ongoing progress of audits since the last progress report that was presented before committee on December 21. The report was written as at the end of January 2022, so obviously there's been progress since that, but it essentially informs members of the continuing process and provides the assurances that the committee will no doubt be seeking. Overall, continuing to make progress with the 21-22 plan and move those audits forward. In regards to the 21-22 reviews, you'll see from the report that I'm reporting that 4 have been finalised since we last sat, and 3 of those reviews are in fact reported in full in the papers this evening. That's Treasury Management, Council Tax and Grants. In regards to Treasury Management, essentially there's a clean bill of health in regards to that particular review. Council Tax, there was significant assurance, there are 3 recommendations, but there's a clear action plan to address those particular areas. And Grants, the Grants Audit was one, again, which was a request of the committee. It was a piece of work that we worked into the plan around about Christmas time. Again, we're reporting a significant assurance on the process up to and including the payment of the grant. Now, there is a secondary piece of work that we're going to include in the 22-23 plan in regards to satisfying the grant use and the spend against given objectives. So that's something that we will be reporting on in the next financial year as a phase 2 part of that piece of work. But all the recommendations in regards to the piece of work that has been finalised have been signed off, and there's a clear action plan in regards to a couple of areas that we identified. There's no high priority recommendations to report before committee tonight in regards to any of the finalised audits, so that's very satisfying. Several other reports were at draft stage when I wrote this report, so those will be reported on in the near future and brought before committee for your consideration. All of the core financials are moving through the process, and you'll see those are indicated in the report tonight at paras 3.6 to 3.8 on pages 15 and 16. So again, we're expecting those to be reported in the very near future. In regards to National Fraud Initiative, NFI, that has continued. We have uploaded various data sets with NFI, and the matches have been received, and those will be investigated in the fullness of time by the relevant services. Business grants in regards to COVID continue to be uploaded. Pre-checks undertaken before payment is made. So we as internal audit continue to play an advisory and coordinating role regarding this. Follow-ups, where we have completed a particular review, we then return and follow up on the implementation of the recommendations. We've continued to do that, and I've reported those follow-ups that have been completed in Appendix 4 of the report tonight. So there's 3 within that report, and I'm pleased to say that all but one of the recommendations across all of those reviews have in fact been implemented. And the one recommendation that remains in progress links essentially to the new way of project management, which is currently being rolled out. So that's very much an active implementation. So we, with follow-ups, we report by exception, and there are no exceptions to be reported before committee this evening. So in summary, overall, the direction of travel is positive for all the reviews, and especially for the follow-ups that have been undertaken. So finally, the report contains some metrics at Appendix 1 and 2, pages 18 to 20. Also reported at Appendix 5 on page 54 is the updated position of the Quality Assurance Improvement Plan, which essentially remains on target for completion at the end of this month. So, Chair, the report is for noting this evening, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Bromwich. It is a very healthy, encouraging picture. Could you just give us a few words, though, on the report on Sanson Walk? Because I know that did arouse a fair amount of interest at the time and subsequently. Chair, yes, the actual Sanson Walk report was almost like a special piece of work that we did last year. It was a lessons learned, and when we reported on it, we have obviously gone through the follow-up process thereafter once it had been signed off and agreed by the report before us this evening shows that all of the areas that were identified as potential areas for lessons to be learned have been addressed, and they have been implemented and satisfied. We have one area which is ongoing, but that's because essentially the way that project management has been delivered has changed, and it's literally just due to normal development and changes in the way that the organisation needs to deliver its projects. So even though we're reporting that as in progress, there is very much an active movement in order to address the actual original lesson learned that presented itself at the time. Thank you, Mr. Bromwich. Members, Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. Page 30, new matters arising, monitoring of single-person discounts. Now, it's been brought to my attention that there are a number of households that appear to have these discounts, but there are several people living at the address. So do we currently compare the electoral roll against the single discount, and what other things can we do to ensure that we're not losing out on this vital form of money?
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Is that for Mr. Bromwich or for Mr. Flynn? Or both? Mr. Bromwich, over to you. Mr. Bromwich, over to you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, a single person discount, it is one of the data sets that is uploaded as part of the NFI matching. So we do match against the electoral roll, single person discount requirements. I think it is fair to say that one has to be careful as to the way that a household is made up, because there can be individuals living at a property, but it's not their main property, and that has to be considered overall as part of the single person discount that is applied. That would be a judgment for partners Civica to make. They certainly undertake their own investigations where they consider that there's possibly a single person discount being claimed when it shouldn't. We can, as part of the council tax, we can back bill if it's proven to be, for all intents and purposes, a fraudulent single person discount claim. Okay. Councillor Barnes, to come back on that, or?
I understand that our contract with Civica is coming to an end, or not?
Through you, Chair. Yes, it is. Well, it's due to, the Civica have requested that their contract concludes at the end of this calendar year, to be finally confirmed. Factors, but we're anticipating that to be the case. Just to add to what Andy said, we do periodically from time to time undertake specific reviews of single person discounts. Undertaken by Civica, I think 2017-18, something like that. So they tend to go maybe on 3 to 5 year cycles. And we find that does lead to a significant reduction, but then over time it builds back up again, and then we carry out another review. The County Council, of course, receives 72% of fund them, these activities. The last one, I took the trouble just to look this up, that we did identified 213 cases of single person discounts which were removed from the council tax. So there's a decision always to be made as to whether the value of what you're getting from the process at a macro level is worth it in terms of the amount of cost of the exercise. But of course, you know, we always, in every single one, is fraud, and therefore every single one, our attention is possible. The question came up again recently at the board that oversees the Civica contract, and we're now whether or not we want to complete the exercise. So, a little while. It doesn't have to be Civica who run it. We can employ other consultants for us, so it's outside of it.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Any other? Councillor Agar?
Thank you, Chair. Mine is about council tax as well, because I think whatever Mr. Sunak does tomorrow, it's obvious to us that the cost of living is going to be quite a difficult issue for a lot of people. What was it today? Sorry. I missed today. Sorry, I was in Jap today. I'll have to have a look at the papers tomorrow. So whatever he did do, I think it's fairly obvious that the cost of living is going to be a big issue for a lot of people in the city. And I'd like to feel that we were reacting with a certain amount of sympathy or empathy, and fairly early on if people are getting into difficulty paying their council tax, so that, you know, we assist them and support them to get there, really, and point them to other help if they need that. So I'm hoping that we pick that up pretty quickly.
Mr. Bright, you want to comment on that? Then over to you.
Yes, we have received two bits of funding. One is the mandatory element, so there's a £150 payment for those on plans A to D, and that will go to people even if their council tax is reduced to 0 or is reduced by council tax. And then we have another, I think it's 174,000 as a discretionary pot which we can use. And the sort of areas which were mentioned in the guidance were those on low incomes in council tax bands E to F. So they're out of that. Some supplementary payments for those in the first group who are potentially suffering additional hardship. And then finally, to support those where they're not the council taxpayer, but they pay all the household bills. So, for instance, if a tenant is paying all the utility bills but doesn't pay the council tax, then that could be covered. We are just in the process of compiling a set of data about what funding sources we have available, government sources. We will need to get agreement as to deploying those and the discretionary funds beginning of.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Any other questions or comments, members of the committee? No? In that case, do we agree to note the report? I don't think it's possible not to note it, but there we are. We have noted it, which takes us on to the penultimate item, review of community services grants 2021 to 2022. This is a special item that I asked if we could have on the agenda because I do feel that we give a lot of money to various grants and organisations, voluntary groups, community groups and so on. I think the question for this committee is to make sure that the money that we have given is spent on the purpose for which it has been given. And I think we need some assurance that that is the case. So this really was the purpose of the report. Who would, I think Mr. Flynn, you're perhaps best to introduce this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an area which is in transition. It's a part of the business which has been developing and evolving over time, hence the requests last year that it be put in the audit plan, because it's an area that's changing. And one of the components is to understand, is this the best use of the council funds? Is it going to the places that it's intended to be placed? So we've tried to bring it into a better structure, so we've got a clearer idea, and basically slim it down to 2 strands. Those will be the major ones, which are sort of 5-year deals, a longer-term grant. And there's, as with all the grants, we're only paying a contribution. So for things like the grant we make to the food bank, as long as the food bank operates, then we have a default assumption that it's delivering. So for the smaller ones, there's a more detailed process whereby we ask for information at the end of the project to demonstrate that it's been undertaken. So there's a self-certification process. In the report, there's an example of one where they've declared that they haven't spent it all and are now in the process of back. I'm aware of another one which I'm following up where we know that they haven't used it all and looking into what's happened to the funds. Just for information, of the 21-22 small grants which have been paid so far, 32 of them in total, in 12 cases we've now received that self-certification, and another 11 cases the delivery is not yet complete or was only recently approved. In 9 cases we are following up with the recipient to get the information. So when the internal audit report review is undertaken next year, they'll be able to give us more detail on how successful the grants team has been in.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Any questions or comments from members? Councillor Barnes, then Councillor Lawrenson.
Thank you. Is there any requirement at the moment that, especially on the small grants, that we get publicity for funding them? Because I can see a real benefit to the community as a whole, knowing that all these wonderful activities are actually partially funded by us. And I think that should be part of any arrangement that takes place with the organisations.
Thank you. That is a very good point. We should get the credit for the money. We're just acting on behalf of the public, so I think we should be getting credit for that, Mr. Flynn. Can you comment on that?
I can't confirm whether we do or not, but certainly I'll pass that on to the community grants team and to build that into the requirement.
If we could just beef that up a bit, Mr. Flynn, I think a requirement, not a request, but a requirement, because I think members would agree generally that should be the case. I'm surprised it's not, but thank you. Councillor Lawrenson.
Thank you, Chair. Worcester Carnival contacted me recently to request a financial contribution towards its next event. And I advised that my COVID recovery fund has strict criteria. Should I have advised Worcester Carnival to apply for a community service grant? And if so, how would they do this?
Ben.
By all means, they can apply for that process. There are details on our website where they can access the forms and applications. If they can't find that, or if they have any particular issues, then they can contact Rosina Shearer directly. She's the officer who is in charge. I can send you the details. Yeah. Okay. I'll forward on the contact details for you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Councillor Bayliss.
Thank you, Chairman. It talks about, I think this is for the small grants, it talks about the people that a panel looks at the issues, and it describes somebody as an experienced community member. I find that a slightly unusual term. I wonder what makes you an experienced community member versus an inexperienced community member. But maybe I'll leave that hanging in the air. But I'm always keen that people making these decisions are accountable for that, and so I'd ask that maybe we look at the membership, and members are, democratically accountable and can be hired and fired by the electorate. So I'd just put that back, that perhaps ought to be the basic principle on which we appoint people to give out money, rather than being an experienced. though I don't know the individual, so I'm on this case.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bates. I totally agree with that, actually. I think that's not an unreasonable position. Mr Flynn, you're dying to come in to respond to that, I can see.
Thank you, Chair. I wouldn't say that exactly. Only to refer to the last report which went to Policy and Resources Committee, which stated that the current makeup is to have an independent person involved in the process. So, I'm not sure how they're appointed. They're appointed by virtue of their experience of carrying out this kind of activity. They're a long-standing member. I think the report merely stated who was on it, as opposed to the means by which they've been appointed. So they've been appointed for some time. You might know the answer.
Mr Stroud is going to give us a legal. Don't confuse it by making it legal.
I was going to start with, from a governance point of view, I mean, perhaps, I think we welcome the question, and it's clear that we need to do a little bit of work to give you a clear answer, Councillor. It seems to me that a co-optee approach onto a panel is something that we're familiar with in other contexts, but co-optees are opted on by the other councillors. So, you know, from a governance perspective, that would be one proposal we could explore, but we'd be happy to take that away, come back. Could we undertake to give you a written response committee on that, about what's the process that we've put together?
Yeah, but I think that would be helpful, but I think there is a very important principle here, isn't there, that we are ultimately responsible for how public money is spent. We're raising public money, so therefore we're accountable. Yeah. And we are accountable, all of us, all the members, through the ballot box. So I think any sort of, however experienced this person may or may not be, they're still not accountable. So I think Councillor Bates is making a good point about accountability. Sorry, Councillor Barnes.
I think the position is slightly similar to Hot Market then, because we do have independent people as well as councillors on that. And it's really hard to get independent people to sit on these committees who have a high calibre and have a good, strong knowledge of the area of business. So maybe it's something that needs to be looked at overall, but I certainly wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because we have some excellent people working with us to make sure that we deliver.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Lawson, did you have a question?
No, but when I was just listening to Councillor Barnes and talking about experienced independent members, and Worcestershire ambassadors came to mind, and I'm not sure whether they thanked me for making that suggestion, because they're probably very busy already, but I think that's just sort of calibre of person or people that we're talking about here. So I'm just putting it out there. Worcestershire ambassadors and organisations like that might want to give up even more of their time towards the City Council.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lawson. Councillor Bayliss?
Yeah, I think it might be worth us as an organisation just reviewing how we make appointments of independents to bodies, and that is open and transparent. That's all any of us, I guess, care about, is that, you know, it isn't favours for friends, or there are political brethren or not our political brethren or whatever it should be. You know, I think there's just something about those that we ought to, particularly when we appoint to these sorts of roles, just consider.
I think it's a fair point, Ms Stroud.
Chair, I'm happy to offer that Jane and I work together and bring a report to this committee. Some members here will know that we do need to, well, the Charitable Trust of Hot Market does need to appoint some members. And we're talking today about getting a recruitment campaign. So very happy to bring a report that talks about what we've done and also a bit more proactive about what we might do. And there's a pressing need to make some more independent appointments in any event.
Yes, thank you. I think you're absolutely right. I think we need a report, not just a written answer to this. I think it raises a lot of questions, a lot of issues, and I really would like to delve a bit more into it, because, you know, we're spending upwards of 300,000 in these grants, and I think we've seen how the process is applied, but I think we're more concerned with, given the money has been spent, whoever's decided to spend it, somebody needs to audit it, and this committee needs to know that our officers and auditor are happy with how the money's been spent. I think that's the central issue here. But there is I say, Councillor Bates made a very good point about accountability. I think we are accountable by definition, the fact that we're elected. So I think it might be a nuanced report about independence and experience and all the rest of it, but ultimately it is for members, because if anything goes wrong, we'll be the ones, quite rightly, who will be in the spotlight. So if we could have that report, I think it would be interesting. Have we that, Mr. Flynn? Certainly. Lovely. I'm glad that raised a debate, because I think it's a very important issue, something I'd like to get to grips with for the future. So thank you for that, which just takes us on to the last item, which is any other business. Councillor Barnes.
Sorry, I didn't get to mention this to you beforehand. I got my head around something else which I've been able to discuss. It's about audit of councillors, actually, because there seems to be no way that the public necessarily easily knows what councillors do in attending meetings. Now, we all know some councillors tend to have subs quite a lot, and other councillors stand in for them. And I think it would be good for democracy if we're a bit more accountable, so that if somebody is regularly missing meetings, then the electorate is aware of that in a straightforward, very clear way, so that if you have, say, 10 meetings a year in planning or whatever, and you only attend 2 of them, that could be an issue that the electorate could want to know about. And conversely, and there may be very good reasons why that person can't attend. They could be ill, they could be out of the country, they could have moved house, whatever it is. But I think it would be salutary to actually have that information passed on to the public. So we have enough stick at the moment about, no, we're only in it for our own purposes. To actually show that we do attend and how hard we work, I think is actually quite a good thing. And occasionally, those people who don't pull their weight, for whatever reason, that could be highlighted as well.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Barnes. Ms Stroud, perhaps I could ask you on this one. It's an unusual issue, and then I'll bring Councillor Bayliss in.
Thank you, Chair. I think I would be wanting to go back to first principles and start by saying that, forgive me, Andy, but an audit operates within. So, that sounds like a terrible oversimplification. Sorry, but an audit is about that assurance within the existing framework. So I can't presently, off the top of my head, framework which would bring internal audit into the ambit. Conduct is regulated by the Code of Conduct. That process is back from a more stringent time. I think that's not a controversial statement, that's a statement of fact. The Nolan Committee had made a series of recommendations to enhance the standards regime, made those recommendations a couple of years ago, and they've been on the stocks with government, and government's been addressing other matters level, and that those recommendations have not been progressed. So I don't think the standards regime would touch this. Going back to my point about rules, there are some requirements in the Local Government Act 72 about a period of time absent from business, but those are quite black and white and wouldn't necessarily encroach into the area that you're referring to. So there's just 2 final points really I want to make. One is that the Constitution is the Council's own rule book, which supplements what's in the Local Government Act. And if councillors want to introduce new rules into the rule book, then they can do that through a motion. And then the final point, I completely forgotten. But in terms of that framework that I was setting out, I think that my last point was going to be that it's often the case that when a matter doesn't fall technically within the terms of the Code of Conduct, you'll see that what the court says is it's the court of public opinion that should make a decision on those matters, and that's been a phrase that's been used in judges in decisions that voters at the ballot box should make their decision on that. So therefore it wouldn't be a function of council officers to collect and audit that information. It may be a choice that others wish to sort of pursue those avenues themselves, but it wouldn't be a function of council officers to collect and publicise. I hope that's helpful. Sorry, it's a bit of a sort of tour of the framework, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Stride. That was very helpful. Councillor Bayliss.
Thank you, Chairman. Those of us with long memories will remember that there was a culture of attendance that was linked to allowances way back just before I started, actually. You used to get paid how many meetings you turned up for and you signed in. It was no guarantee of quality. It was simply you were there. And having had 20 years in this place, people can be present and contribute zero to debates and decisions and the governance of this organisation. So I don't think that simply the percentage of time somebody turns up at a committee is a good indicator of whether they're doing a good job or not. I mean, the other, let's face it, the work in the Guildhall is just one aspect of your life as a councillor. Now, you might be a fabulous community councillor out there on the doors every week, knocking them, engaging with the public, dealing with issues, but you may not be a fabulous attender at committee meetings. You may not be a fabulous speaker or contributor at meetings. So you'd have to have from my view, you'd have to have a rounded picture of the councillor. And I think there is a council in the locality in Worcestershire that does this, gives a percentage number of attendance of meetings, and I've always thought that what a rubbish indicator it is of how good or bad that individual is. I mean, it depends how many meetings you have, how many committees you serve on for a start. You could be stripped back to being on full council and one committee, or you might be somebody who's who's on 5. And we have people on, or more even, so, and would it include where you substitute for other people or not? I mean, there's a whole host of things. I mean, ultimately, I think the electorate make their decisions. The attendance at every meeting is recorded. It's on the minutes. It's on tonight's minutes. Who's here, who's not here. If somebody wants to go through and have a look, see whether Councillor Bayliss or Councillor Barnes is any good at attending meetings, they can do that. I mean, we're on the telly now. You can have a good look at us there and see whether you think we're doing anything useful or not. I think Jenny's motives are the right, noble, but I don't think this is the right way of doing it. Simply saying, do you attend meetings? I think we'd need something much more sophisticated to say whether they're any good, bad or indifferent than simply percentage of those.
Thank you, Councillor Bayliss. Any other questions or comments on that? Well, thank you for opening a very interesting debate, but I would suggest that we refer that at some stage, or somebody refers it to another place, i.e. full council. That would be my view on that. But fascinating debate. I'm happy to be judged by any standard you want to concoct. But there we are. And that, members, brings the meeting to an end. Thank you very much for your attendance and your participation. Meeting closes. Well.